So welcome everyone. We're so excited to have this opportunity to spend some time with the acclaimed storyteller, Penninah Schram. And first I want to thank Dina Ox for suggesting that we invite Peninnah to be with us online. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we see if we can make that happen? And we were able to. So thanks for the great suggestions. And just so you know, when you suggest things to us, sometimes we can actually make them happen. So we're excited to welcome Penninah Schram. To give you a little bit of background, though probably most of you are familiar with Peninnah. She is, I believe, a professor emerita of Yeshiva University. And she is a renowned storyteller of Jewish folk tales and in the Jewish oral tradition. In 2003, she received National Storytelling Network's Lifetime Achievement Award. And she's also the author of 12 books of Jewish folk tales, including some famous ones that you may have heard of: The Minstrel and the Storyteller, The Magic Pomegranate, The Hungry Clothes, and other Jewish folk tales. So we are very excited to welcome Peninnah with us here at Temple Emanu-El this afternoon, and we're excited to share and learn a lot of stories. So,
thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.
Yeah. And Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem Shalom.
Now I feel at home. Wonderful. And when I received that Lifetime Achievement Award, I told a little anecdote, which I'm not going to take time to tell, but I want to say, not yet. Think on it. So a week from tonight, we will be beginning the celebration of Passover, Pesach. And there is in the Haggadah the word Magid, the leader, the one who begins to tell the story and narrate and read the Haggadah, because that is what we're celebrating, the Exodus from Egypt. What has to happen, and this is your cue, what has to happen before the Magid, or the leader, can begin telling or reading the story, the Haggadah? What's going to inspire him or her, or motivate the Magid, or serve as a catalyst so that the Magid can say, listen to the story? And rabbis can answer too.
Questions? Somebody has to ask a question?
Yes, 4 kashas, 4 questions. Without those questions, it doesn't happen. And you can sit there all night and wait for the food. So questions, I remember hearing Elie Wiesel say, questions are more important than answers. How right he is. And we are a people who question. And I'm sure you know that the Jews have a curious way of answering questions. Anybody know? You ask a Jew a question, the Jew answers with a
question.
A question. So people ask me questions. And you can have the opportunity, of course, to write some of your questions in the chat, because I don't know if Ethan, but Victor, your rabbis, will monitor the questions later on, and I hope I'll get a chance and time to answer a couple of questions. But one of the questions people ask me is, how do I choose the stories I tell? Now, it's true. A Jew answers with a question with a question. Somebody says, how are you? How should I be? You know that story. But if you ask a storyteller a question, the storyteller answers with a
story.
A story. Go to the head of the class. So when people ask me, how do I choose the stories I tell? I answer that question with a story. The Dubner Maggid, and a Maggid in this case is a traveling rabbi that teaches Judaism, excuse me, that teaches Judaism through stories. So the Maggid of Dubno was walking with a student, and the student turned and said, "Tell me, Rebbe, tell me, my teacher, how is it you always have the perfect story to fit the subject under discussion?" And the Dubner Maggid looked at his student and said, "I'll answer that question with a story."
Sorry.
Once a nobleman sent his young son to the military academy to learn how to shoot. And after 5 years, the lieutenant was riding home on his horse. His chest was covered with medals, a diploma in his pocket, when he was riding on his horse through a small little village. And there he looked and saw on the side of a barn 100 circles drawn in chalk, and in the center of each of those circles was a bullet hole. The lieutenant, this young man, stopped his horse and he said, "Who is this amazing marksman who could shoot 100 perfect bullseyes? I must meet him." Just then, a young boy walked across the road and said, "Oh, that's Narala. He's the town fool." "I don't care what he is," said the young man, the new marksman. "I must meet him. Even I can't do that. He must have won every gold medal in the world. I must meet him." No, you don't understand," said the little child. "Narala doesn't draw the circle first and then shoot. First he shoots, and then he draws the circle."
Mm.
And that's the way it is with me, said the Dubner Maggid. I don't just happen to have a perfect story to fit the subject under discussion. First, I read a lot of stories. I listen to a lot of stories. I keep those stories in my head. And then when I find a story I especially love and need to tell, then I introduce the subject for which I have the perfect stories. And so it is with me. And since it's Pesach, and we're beginning already because Jews don't wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, happy Passover." Everything is with preparation. Everything starts on the Erev, the night before. We are really now in the midst, I'm sure, of all the preparations. And so since Pesach is a time for telling stories and to prepare ourselves and to prime the earth to be ready to tell these stories around the table, around the Seder table, I happen to have a few perfect stories. And in our very brief time, I'm going to tell you several stories. So we have a very popular, in fact, the most popular acting hero in all of oral tradition, in written literature, sacred literature, and in the oral. Who is the most popular acting hero in our Judaism world? Anybody?
Moses?
He's
Oh,
about third. He's about third.
Abraham, Joseph,
A little further down in that list.
Abraham.
A lot of stories about these are good.
They say the storyteller or something. that comes
More
to-
recent, more recent.
Yeah.
Well, we connect this character with Passover, but it's not only connected to it, Passover. Who?
I think someone said Elijah.
Elijah the prophet is right. Yes.
wow.
Yes.
Very good.
And there is so much to say about Elijah the prophet. Eliyahu HaNavi, my most favorite character in all folklore and stories. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was born and grew up in New London, Connecticut, and my father was a chazan, a cantor, and he loved telling me stories. And when he told me this particular story with Elijah the prophet, I would ask him to tell it again and again and again. So I'm going to give you homework. I can't help but do that. Think about the earliest stories you remember, not the first ones you've ever were told, or stories that you read over and over, or asked to be told over and over, because we are shaped and influenced by those early stories that had an impact on us. And Elijah did that for me. And these biblical characters, and you mentioned, of course, several other biblical characters, very, very many stories about them. But when a biblical character becomes a figure in folk tales, they change and they become, if you will, experts, specialists in a particular domain. For Elijah, he was a fire and brimstone prophet, but not in folk tales. He becomes a master of miracles, and a master of disguise, and a master of bringing hope. I mean, Elijah's even a godfather in some of the Cinderella versions that we have in our Jewish oral tradition. Are you surprised? There are about 24 Cinderella stories, variants. Yes, so much to be said about Elijah, but I'm going to leave it there, and just to know that one of the things, certainly why he lives with us throughout the centuries, throughout the generations, from Torah, Talmud, Midrash, folk tales, Hasidic stories, in the yearly cycle of all the holidays, he is present, all of the life cycle events. You know, at a bris, you have the chair of Eliyahu. He is there with us always. And so you remember that Elijah the prophet never died. He went up in a chariot of fire and dropped his mantle down on his protege, Elisha. So there's so much imagination and so much love that I have, and I hope you do too, for Elijah. And of course, he will be present at your Seder. Elijah the prophet, a master of disguise, sometimes as an old man, sometimes a traveler, sometimes a handsome horseman. You never know who is Elijah the prophet, perhaps sitting next to you. And Elijah the prophet would walk from town to town, watching people to see how they acted one with another, how they spoke to each other, and he would remember, he would witness, and he would remember. Well, Elijah the prophet was always testing to see how people act. And he would test them and he would reward them or retract that reward if they didn't live up to their promises of being generous or hospitable or whatever the values are. Elijah was dressed as a beggar, torn, dirty clothes. And it was about the time to start the Seder and the Passover Seder. And he wondered, here is this mansion of a very wealthy man. I will be his guest tonight. And he went up on the porch and he knocked at the door. And actually the wealthy man, Meyer, had just welcomed in some guests. And so he was not quite closing the door yet. And Elijah the prophet said, Chag Sameach, Good Yom Tov, I've come to be the guest in your Seder. All my guests have arrived and I don't have a single empty seat and I wish you well, Chag Sameach. And he closed the door with the Meyer, the wealthy man, on the inside of the house, and Elijah the prophet, the beggar, outside of the house. Well, this master of disguise returned to that house now dressed in beautiful clothes of a nobleman, a very handsome suit of clothes, a silken vest, a satin top hat, and a golden handled cane. And he knocked on the door gently with that golden cane. And the door opened and it was Meyer, but seeing now this gentleman, this nobleman, he said, "Oh, the Juntif come in, come in." And with great honor, with kavod, he turned to the servants to place him in the best seat at the table. Yes, there were some empty seats at the table. The table was beautiful with wonderful tablecloth and china and crystal goblets and silverware, and food was already being placed on the table because it was the time to eat. They had finished the first part of the Haggadah. And so they put Elijah to a seat. And of course, the servants came and served him what everybody was already eating, the gefilte fish with the chrein. Chrein, you know, chrein, it's great to say this, you know, the horseradish, yes. And he sat there and he smiled and he looked around. Everybody was eating with a hearty appetite. And then they brought the soup, the lokshen chicken soup, and with big matzah balls. And everybody was slurping and eating and enjoying. And then more food came, the roast chickens and the kishke and the potato kugel. And of course the noodles were Pesach, were kosher the Pesach. And he looked around and smiled and waited. And then finally he picked up the gefilte fish and shoved it into his pocket and some slices of horseradish. And then he took some of the chicken and put it in other pockets, and he took the kishke and put it in other pockets, and then the potato kugel and all the different fruits and the vegetables and the meats. And then he took the chicken soup with the matzah balls, putting the matzah balls maybe down his sleeves, and poured the chicken soup all over himself. And then he picked up the goblet with red wine and poured it into the pockets and all over. And by now, Meyer was up on his feet and everybody was looking around because they had never seen this curious ritual. Has anybody here ever seen it? And Meyer was on his feet. He said, "What are you doing? Are you Meshuggah Chosadeya? What are you doing? You're dressed like a nobleman and you're acting like an ignoramus." And Elijah, the beggar, now turned nobleman, looked at Meyer, looked at the guests and said, "It's very simple. When I first came to the door to your house with my torn, little bit spotty clothes, you closed the door on my face. But when I returned wearing these elegant clothes of a gentleman, you invited me in with great honor. You seated me at a place of honor, and you served me the best foods and wine with honor. But I am the same person. The only thing that changed were my clothes. And since my clothes were invited to the feast, why should they not be fed the feast?" And he continued putting some food down his pockets. But when everybody whose faces were down in shame looked up, that guest had disappeared, and all that remained on his chair was the golden-handled cane. Elijah the prophet, a trickster in this story. You'll find this story in many other versions where other tricksters from different cultures take the place of Elijah. But of course, it's a wonderful one. It's a teaching tale. And it's, of course, special and appropriate for every holiday, isn't it? Every Shabbos, every time. And we have versions with those other holidays too. There is the Israel Folktale Archives in Israel, actually housed at the Haifa University. And it was founded in 1955 by the great folklorist Dov Noy. And in the Israel Folktale Archives, through the volunteers and folklorists, they have gathered over 25,000 folktales from all the various ethnic communities in Israel. It's an incredible archives because that's where our people's stories are being stored and gathered and preserved from all the people in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. And also they are classified according to tale type and motifs and all of that. It's wonderful. So there, Elijah, at least in the very beginning of the years of gathering stories, Elijah became the most popular character in those stories that they were gathering. This story comes from Morocco and from Iraq and some other countries in the Middle East. And I want to explain two Hebrew words which play a role in this story. Seder. Anybody know what Seder means?
Order.
Order.
It's order. And it's the order also of the whole evening. Pardon?
What?
I didn't hear it.
I didn't hear it either.
Oh, it's the order from where you're starting until you get to the feast. The feast is included, and then you continue until the Afikomen, and then on and on and on, and songs. It also means, well, order and then the order of the Pesach Seder. The word Seder, say that with me, please. Seder. It's the longest sound we have in English. Seder means
Without order.
disorder, without order. It's upside down order, yes. Just know those two words and then things will make sense, I think. In Marrakesh, in Morocco, there was a young couple who had married, very much in love. And whenever it came a holiday, Shabbat, everything was prepared, everything was practiced. And time went by and they gave great deal of money for tzedakah, charity. They performed many mitzvot. But when time continued going by and there was no child, the couple wanted a child more than anything in the world. It was the only thing missing. They had a beautiful home. They had a comfortable life. And so they would go to different rabbis in different places and asked for amulets and special prayers, and still no child came. And then it came Pesach, Passover, and everything was prepared according to the rules and the laws. And at the night of the Seder, the young couple were sitting at the table, and the husband began to read the Haggadah. And the wife began to cry. No, my wife, do not weep. HaKadosh Baruch, the Holy One will remember us. We will have a child. And suddenly there was a knock at the door. And the husband went to the door, and there was a weary traveler. And he invited him in, and he brought water for the washing and invited the guests to come to the Seder table and with them join and eat and to talk and to discuss all of the problems and the issues that are in the Haggadah and the questions that are asked. And at the time, at one point, the host picked up the Seder plate. And as the Moroccan tradition is, he waved it over the guest's head and over his wife's head, giving a blessing to each of them. And then the wife picked up that Seder plate and did the same over the head of her husband. And they enjoyed this discussion during the feast. And when the Seder was finished, when it was completed, the old man, the traveler, stood up and said, "I must leave." And the couple looked at him and said, "But it's dark and cold outside. Please stay with us tonight." "No, I must leave. But I should may I merit to be your guest at next year's Seder. And may your Seder be Seder." And their guest left. Now, this couple didn't expect a thank you, but they were puzzled by these words, that he would be their guest at the next Seder, but their Seder should be Seder. Some weeks passed, and the wife found that she was going to have a baby. Great joy was in that house, in that family. And when the baby was born, it was close to the next Passover, the next Seder. And everything was as a Seder should be. The food was prepared, the table was prepared, the Haggadahs are there at the table. And the husband and wife now are with a very little, jumpy little child in their laps. And of course, what happens with the child reaches out and the wine bottle gets dropped over and spilled wine on the tablecloth. He took a little plate and dropped it to the ground and laughed, shrieking with joy. And then he reached out for the Haggadah and tore a piece of the paper. And what did the parents do? They laughed with joy at the work of their child. And suddenly there was a knock at the door. And when the husband opened the door, it was the same traveler that had come the year before. And he invited him in, brought water for washing, and invited him to sit at the Seder table. And as they were eating and as they were having discussions, suddenly the husband and wife, the new mama and papa, looked at the table, looked at their child grabbing and knocking over the wine glasses. And the words of that guest, suddenly they remembered those words, that your Seder should be Seder. And when they looked around at all of everything upside down and mushed together, they understood that was not just words, but that it was a blessing to have a child. And so they both started to talk at the same time. "Forgive us, we didn't understand what your words meant." And the traveler said, "Of course not. How could you know? And I bless you that your child will grow to love the study of Torah, that your child will fulfill many mitzvot, and that your child will find true love." And then that guest disappeared. And the husband and wife looked at each other and said, "That must have been Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet." and he gave us a blessing in disguise. Mhm. So I have another story I'm going to tell at the end, but I thought at this point, would you all unmute yourselves, or rabbis, unmute, the magic word.
Yeah,
Okay.
people should be able to unmute.
Oh, look. Look who's in the middle.
And if you haven't typed some questions, do it now, and maybe you'll ask them rather than type them if we have a bit of time.
So,
Last year, it was the beginning of the
Feel the
pandemic.
boxes in the back of his.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
I was planning to go to Israel. My daughter lives in Israel. She went there for her junior year abroad and met the love of her heart and never returned to New York or to America. So I have 3 Sabra grandchildren. She married a marvelous Moroccan Jewish man, Israeli. But I had to cancel my flights, and it was actually in middle March when I realized I better cancel now. And my son and his wonderful family with 2 little boys live in Philadelphia, but it was the beginning. April was too risky to travel there and for them to travel here. And so my friends said, Zoom with us at our Seder. And I said, no, it doesn't feel right for me to do that. And of course, nobody was inviting, and nobody really, and I didn't want to go to anybody's house. It was really a fearful time as it has continued. I call it, it was a suspended time of tension and dread. So I had a Seder for the first time in my life, all alone. But a few days or a few nights before the Seder, I had an epiphany. I realized that Passover is one of the pilgrimage holidays. There's Sukkot, there's Passover, Pesach, and Shavuot. You know, there's a wonderful tradition during Sukkot. How many of you know the name, the word Ushpizin?
Guests.
Yes, the guests. If there's a tradition, I mean, people are sitting around a table in a sukkah, and you are to invite certain biblical figures. That's the tradition of the 7 male biblical characters, including Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, etc., etc. And you can add on other women characters as well, and maybe historic people, and maybe people in your family that's no longer there, but to bring them to the table. It's a beautiful tradition. I hope that some of you will pick up on that as well. There's a wonderful Israeli movie called Ushpizin. If you haven't seen it, try to find it. So I thought to myself, and it was, I think, either very early at dawn or it was during the night when I had this thought, that since Sukkot is a pilgrimage holiday, one of the Shloshim Regalim, then why can't I transfer and adapt this concept of the guests, of the Ushpizin, to my table for Pesach, for the Seder? But with the one change, major change, is that the characters, for the biblical characters, I would have them connected some way to Passover. That they were there in Egypt, that they went through the Reed Sea, that they were there going through the desert. Anybody want to suggest who might be? And I chose 6 people. I wrote about it. It got printed in the forward when in the newspaper. Who would you choose from the biblical characters who are connections, have some kind of connection to Passover? No? Just say, just speak. Or Rabbi, call on somebody.
Sharon, I see Sharon's hand.
Moses?
Who?
Moses.
Moses, of course. Yes, absolutely. Good.
Mary.
Miriam, absolutely. Where she got the epiphany to take the timbrel with her.
Aaron.
Aaron, yes, the 3 siblings. Good. Who else?
Joshua.
Sure, why not? I didn't choose him, but that's okay.
Pharaoh.
Who else? Who?
Pharaoh.
I'm not sure. It might bring up too many negative feelings and they might come to blows. Yeah, no.
The midwives. Midwives. Shipwrecked
Oh,
wives.
yes, absolutely wonderful. Whoa,
Nachshon.
Nachshon.
Yes.
Pharaoh's daughter.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting, but no, I didn't think of that. But yes, you can have her. Yeah.
Important.
There are 2 others that I chose. Actually, I didn't remember. I mean, I love those midwives. Do you know at Brandeis University, there's an award given for civil disobedience,
I'm proud.
and they call it the Shifra and Pua Award. Yeah, it's great. I love them. All right, I'll tell you who. Did I hear another one? All right, I'll tell you the 2 that you left out. Elijah the prophet.
I just said that.
I didn't hear it. Forgive me. Oy, oy, oy.
I just said Elijah.
Ah, that's okay. Yeah, but I guess somehow I didn't hear it. Okay, thank you. Elijah the prophet, of course. And the last one that although as I say, you can add more to them and people in your family and in history. I chose Serach bat Asher. Not Sarah, but Serach, another ch sound. Serach bat Asher. Now, I just have to tell you this, and I will tell you a little bit about Serach. When my guests came around me at the Seder, my Seder, I asked Miriam why she had the wisdom, the chokmah, to take that timbrel with her. And she gave me a wonderful story. And it was beautiful. Then also, she said she pushed Nachshon into the Reed Sea. But nobody knows that.
Yeah, figures.
You think he just jumped by himself, huh? But Serach bat Asher is one of these women I love so much, who also did not die. And why? She is the daughter of Asher, who is the son of Jacob. So she's the granddaughter of Jacob. When all of or most of the sons, the brothers rather, went to Egypt to get food during those 7 years of famine. You remember that, yes? Of course, he didn't. He would hold back Benjamin, but he'd send the other brothers. And when finally, on one of their visits, Joseph reveals himself as their brother. But this is only because he requested, of course, Benjamin to come. And he said for all of them to come and live with him in Egypt. Their life would be good. He asked after his father, who was very elderly, mourning all those years for his beloved son Joseph. So when the brothers went back to Canaan, they knew that they just couldn't burst into the house and say, "Hey, Pa, guess what? Joseph's alive," because An older man like that, grieving for so many years. I mean, he could just, it would be too much to bear. Serach bat Asher, that time was a little girl who loved to sing and play her harp. And she was very wise, and they knew that. And they said to her, Serach, go in and tell the grandfather about Joseph, and they told her what happened. And when she went into the house, she waited for Jacob to be in prayer, and she sat in the corner and she started to play and sing. And what did she sing? Joseph is alive. Joseph is alive. And finally, in consciousness, he realized what she was singing, and he turned to her and said, is it true? And of course, the caravans had come from Egypt to take them back, all of them, the whole family. And Jacob said to his granddaughter, Serach bat Asher, because you have brought me the good news, I bless you that you should have unending life. Unending life. And God granted that blessing. And so it's almost a partner with Elijah the prophet in a way. But we have many, many midrashim, many stories about Serach bat Asher. She is a fascinating character. And I wrote the story as a monologue about her going through the generations and centuries. So I'm certainly invited and look forward to seeing her again this year, as well as all the others that you have enumerated. And I'd love you to, even when you're not alone for the Seder, bring in some Ushpizin and have your guest tell you stories about that person and their connection to Pesach or not, and why they chose that person. Because again, it's a time to tell stories about who we are, who we use as our role models, and why, and so much more, along with some of the stories that I was talking about with your wonderful rabbis. And I believe that just meeting them very shortly, for a short time, I know that they love stories, and I have a feeling they are very, very good storytellers. So what questions do you have? I'll take, one or two questions. Rabbis, can you either read if anybody's written a...
Please write in the chat box or unmute, but maybe can I start? I see something on your piano, Gamze Ya'avor.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So it leads me to my question.
Okay.
That's a story that I have told because of the pandemic. I wonder if there are stories that you have shared. Gamze, this too shall pass. I think it's a beautiful story, and there's the one about a ring, and I'm sure there's many of them.
And it's a King Solomon legend. Yes.
I'm wondering if during this time there has been a story that you hadn't told in a long time that you has been sparked a new light in you, or means something different this past year.
Well, there are stories that I tell. Is that kickback or something? That's why folktales live for years and years and years and years, because their wisdom that's embedded in these stories, we need that wisdom no matter what century it is, or how old we are, or where we live in the world. And they take on even more. The debate of the parts of the body, the great debate, I call it, is, I can't tell it now, but it's the wisdom of being careful how we use words. Because the tongue has great power for good and for evil. And so we need to use our words wisely. that story I told very frequently after 9/11, and I'm telling that story many times as well today. That one especially is a very meaningful one. And now, you know, with words, yeah, words matter. Yeah, thank you for asking. And I hope that maybe you can tell everybody that story. This was calligraphied by my daughter-in-law, Sonia Gordon Walensky. Her website is pasukart.com. Pasuk Art, P-A-S-U-K-A-R-T. And so she was take a pasuk. And this happens to be my mantra. In fact, during this whole pandemic, I mean, I've been saying it to myself a lot. So that has been my mantra during times of crisis, times of stress for many, many years. And so she did this beautiful calligraphy in Hebrew and in English. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? If not, I think I have time now to tell my last story. Yes? All right. And it's a story about an apple. It's a real apple. And I dedicate this story to the child in each of us that we must keep alive. And I saw a youngster, I don't know if he's still here, but if there are any children listening, I dedicate this story to the children, but to the child in each of us that we must keep alive. A long time ago, there was a great oak forest. And in that forest, those trees grew tall and majestic, reaching right up into the sky. And in that same forest, there was a little apple tree. And the apple tree shivered through the cold winter months with the snow on its branches. But every night that little apple tree looked up at those stars in the sky, and it seemed to the apple tree as though those stars were hanging in the branches of those oak trees. And so the apple tree looked up and said, God, oh God, I'd like to have stars hanging in my branches just like those oak trees have. And God looked down at that little apple tree and said, have patience, patience, patience. Time passed. This is your time to do this with you. Take your hands. Time passed, and repeat with me. Are you unmuted? Time passed, and the seasons changed. Okay, time passed and the seasons changed. Everybody, time passed and the seasons changed, and now it was.
And
And
so
so it was
What?
from how it was.
Yes. What comes after winter?
Spring.
spring.
And in spring we have Pesach. Yes, the spring came, and every night the little apple tree looked up at those millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of stars. And the little apple tree looked up and said, God, I want more than anything in the world to have stars in my blossoms. And God looked down at that little apple tree and said, isn't it enough that you have wonderful shade to offer people and fragrant blossoms? Isn't that enough? And the little apple tree said,
No.
time passed, everybody. Time passed and the seasons changed, and now it was
Summer.
And in the summer, the little apple tree was filled with tiny little green apples.
So fall. I think.
And now time passed and the seasons changed, and now it was
Fall.
the fall. And in the fall, the apple tree was filled with apples, but still, you know what happened. Night after night, the little apple tree looked up at those millions of stars and called out, God, God, I want more than anything in the world to have stars in my tree, in my apples.
Back to winter.
And God sent a wind to blow. Can I hear? You can't see me. I do have a knife. It's a very hard apple. I may have to stand on this one.
Oh, there's an app. Oh, she
But
did it. I know this story. There's an app.
Don't say, don't say. But I need wind. I need the wind. The wind began to blow, and the trees swayed. Can you sway like trees sway? And the apples began to fall to the ground. And when they finally hit the ground, so I'm going to have to stand and do this a little bit better. Okay, forgive me on. Yeah, wind. Give me a wind. Sitting down, I couldn't eat it. Oh, oh, oops. Okay. That's not supposed to happen, but I'm sitting down and cutting an apple wasn't right. Okay. And when the apple tree dropped to the ground, they split open, and they saw that they had
Stars.
been got them all along. But that's not the end of the story.
Okay.
You know, we Jews love apples. We have apples
With honey.
on Rosh Hashanah, right? We cut them into slices, dip them into honey, and wish each other a sweet year. Comes Hanukkah. What do you eat with your latkes?
Applesauce.
I'm glad you didn't say sour cream. Comes Pesach next Saturday night.
Haroset.
The Shabbat with the harosis.
Yep.
And even some Sephardic recipes use apples. But certainly as Ashkenazi Jews, we have apples and for the harosis. But how do you cut your apples? Probably like everybody else in the world. You take it with the core up and you cut it down. But if you change your direction just a little bit, and if you change your direction just a little bit, and if you change your direction just a little bit, you too will find the star
Really?
Yeah.
yourself. And so this is a time to sit around the table, a table with mention, a table with people, a table with ushpizim and stories. And we tell the stories that are the sacred stories from Torah, the personal stories of our lives, the family stories, how we came to America, what happened, it's, you know, in school and immigrants and all kinds of stories and objects that you have maybe handed down from your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And we have also the traditional folk tales. And so when you have, like we Jews have in our calendar, how many, some maybe know Yiddish. They say, Alamontik and Donishtik, Nocha Yontef. And for every Monday and Thursday, another holiday, right? Shabbos, Shabbat comes every week. And Pesach comes once a year. But and Sukkot comes, you know, we have in our calendars wonderful times sitting around the table to share our stories. And when we exchange our stories, listening to each other and telling and sharing, we bring more love, more shalom, peace, and we bring more light to this world. Chag Sameach. And I wish all of you a Shavua Tov. And thank you for sharing the stories with me this evening. And if there are any questions, the rabbis have my email, so please don't hesitate to send it to me. Any questions, anything you'd like. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Penninah.
Thank
This
you.
has been a lovely way to spend an hour this afternoon with these charming stories. And even if you've heard them before, you haven't heard them from Peninnah.
No.
I know I've told that last story, but not nearly as well as we just heard
Yeah,
it.
it's actually a children's story that is in this publication, but I tell it, as you know, for people up to 120. And it's a wonderful story. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I have your book, The Stories That One Generation Tells One
Oh,
Another.
thank you. Yes.
Such a good book. And it's
Oh,
so
thank
much the connection between cultures, the cultural history, and it's awesome.
you. Oh, that foreword by Elie Wiesel alone is worth the price of the book.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so proud of you that you delved into the stories. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We are.
So Peninnah, we saw you a couple of years ago in Austin, Texas,
Yes.
at the JCC in Austin, Texas. And I went up to speak to you afterwards and I said, somehow I'm going to get you to my temple. And
I
here you are.
remember that. Yes,
Yes.
I do. Thank you.
You had your guitarist with you,
Yes, Gerard.
but he had
Italy. I know.
laryngitis.
I know. But we have
Yeah.
that wonderful CD, that Minstrel and the Storyteller.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but I remember that. Thank
So
you.
hopefully Peninnah will be able to join us sometime next year in person.
That would be great.
God willing.
That'd be
Oh,
great.
God. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I love it.
And so as we learned, Passover, there's a lot of tales about Elijah, but we get to meet Elijah every single week with the end of Shabbat,
Yes.
Havdalah. So if you have I know it's a little early, but we're together. It's always nice to do Havdalah. You can see the sun coming in. The sun is setting.
Yes, it's really
Yeah, I see it
streaming
too
right
behind
through my
me. But
blind.
So I'm going to get my Havdalah set, and Cantor Ott's here to help us lead. So if you want to, we're going to sing and end Shabbat together in holiness. And
The alternative is, since we have till Tuesday night to do Havdalah, we'll keep telling stories to each other.
Cantor Ott, if you want to start singing, I'll get my.
Good.
If you have your own Havdalah set at home, please take it out. Sing from home, please.
Bye. la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamabdil ben kodesh lechol, hamabdil ben kodesh lechol. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Hamafil ben kodesh lechol, hatotinu impo, sarinu v'haspenu yod bekacho, v'hakol chavim balayla. Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. A good week of peace, make gladness reign and joy increase. A good week of peace, make gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Binayah B'Yaminu, Yahweh Eloheinu, in Mashiach ben David, in Mashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Shabbat Tov to everyone.
Shabbat tov, everyone.
Tov.
Thank you for joining us. A good week, a week of cleaning, preparing for Passover. But we look forward to celebrating Passover in the coming days with all of you. Shabbat tov.
Shavua tov.
Tov.
And join us tomorrow for our drive-through and get your little Hanukkah gift, your Passover gift.
What time is that, Rabbi?
We do have leftover hamantashen, I think.
What time?
Tomorrow from 11 to 12:30.
Okay.
Thank you.
you.
Wonderful to meet Ethan and Rabbi Victor Appel and all of you. So thank you.
Looking forward to
Mitsuyan.
having you in
Yeah,
West
happy and a healthy Pesach and for years and years on. Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for
Bye.
coming.
Thank
May
you.
you meet
Thank you.
Elijah
Thank
the
you
prophet.
very-
There's a Yiddish blessing. May you meet Elijah the prophet.
And maybe they're sitting next to you.
And he tells great stories.
You too.
I know.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye-bye.